prominent personalities, Prem, Panicker, and Neha Sinha. Neha Sinha is an award-winning wildlife conservationist and biologist with the photojournalist knack of capturing life. She studied biodiversity conservation at Oxford University after winning an INLAKS scholarship and works with Bombay Natural History Society at present. She's also a noted columnist and has taught environmental politics at Delhi University. Her book, Wild and Willful, is among the top 10 non-fiction books of 2012-21. And she had a session yesterday, and if I may say so, it was a house full. With that, today she's going to have a conversation and an Ask Me Anything session with Prem Panicker. Prem Panicker is a journalist and an editor with over 30 years of experience, everybody. He helped launch Rediff.com, something that we use on a daily basis, especially people in the corporate world. It's India's first internet-only news site and has been the editor of the New York-based India Abroad, the news magazine of record for the influential Indian American Committee. He's also a founder of the independent site Pipli.org, which focuses on multimedia long-form storytelling on issues relating to water, climate change, the environment, wildlife, and man-animal conflict. And this is the perfect moderator, if I may say so, Neha Sinha, for the same. So let's have a huge round of applause, and may I request Neha to usher the author on stage. May I request the author to usher the author on stage, and let's have a beautiful conversation ahead of us. Thank you so much.
Guys, first up, you don't have to sit all the way to the back. Lots of seats in front, so that's that. Secondly, this is not actually a conversation between, Neha was just telling me that she's had enough of having conversations with me. We just did a session. This is basically a request during our session where people said, can we just have you guys answer whatever questions we have? Which normally takes an encyclopedia, which neither of us claim to be, but you're welcome to bring up any topic. If we can talk meaningfully to that topic, we are happy to indulge. This is your session, it's not ours. So somebody with the mic, just whoever wants to ask whatever, please feel free.
And just to add that the previous session was on long format or deep dive journalism and writing, and Prem is a veteran journalist, and he has co-founded this beautiful website called Pipli.org, and he also was an editor for Rediff and Yahoo, which did some very original and long format pieces which are narrative nonfiction. So the previous session was about how we create space as readers also to ask for better pieces which are broad and meaningful, and also he spoke a bit about his writing process. And at that time we had a request to have another session, so you can ask him anything you want about writing, journalism, media, anything. Of course, no personal questions, that goes without saying. So we'll just open it out for questions.
Time out.
There's one at the back.
Time out for a second. She said very cleverly that you can ask me questions. It's ask both of us, please. She also has to work for her,
I didn't sign up for an AMA. I'm just the moderator.
We'll see.
Yeah, please feel free to ask me if you like, but he is the main focus. Yeah.
Since this is our session, we will decide. So hi Neha, hi Prem. Thank you for this session. So I'm an intrusive person with stalking tendencies. So I want to, please could you tell us about the time when you were with 25 Pulitzer-winning writers, and could you just tell us, could you just share that story with us, for starters?
Yeah, I think it was a very surreal experience. What happens is that there is this, or there used to be, now they do it in various corners of the world, but in Boston they used to host what is called the Pointer Conference on Journalism. It's a 3-day conference The fees are prohibitive, so, but then what happens is that the media houses, the big media houses, sponsor their journalists for this. I managed to sweet talk my CEO into parting with the family jewels, and so the first year I went, and then there's this gentleman called Jay Rawson, who was a educator, a media professional, and also a teacher. And I wangled a job on his team as one of the coordinators, so I got to attend 3-4 sessions for free. It was educative because it's a hall about twice this size, and it gets filled to capacity. And the first time I was there, it was like, I realized that everybody in the audience had a Pulitzer Prize, at least, either a Pulitzer Prize or an American Magazine award or whatever, and there was me sitting in a corner, and it was the most daunting kind of thing. You're suddenly looking around and saying, what the hell am I doing here? How did I even get here? But I think, we talk so much about the craft of writing and the process of writing, and we think that it is somehow divorced from other forms of communication, like the spoken word, or and for me, the third year was an epiphany, because what happened was that because I was supposed to help organize, I was called to Boston 2 days before the event. The events are normally Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I was there on Thursday. There was a forecast of snow. Friday morning, we were running around. It was snowing briefly. Everything happens in the hotel. It's not like you have to go out. It was snowing briefly. We were busy calling up the writers, finding out where they were. So the structure is that there will be keynotes. There's a morning keynote, there's an evening keynote. In between, there are breakout sessions where some of these journalists actually run workshops. So it's a Pulitzer Prize winner doing a workshop on, let's say, structure or timeline or the use of dialogue. And the people sitting there are also Pulitzer winners or magazine award winners. So it's very engaging because they also know what this thing is about. So it was snowing outside, we didn't care, we were doing our thing. We went to bed very late. By then it was snowing fairly heavily. We woke up early, 6 o'clock. 3 feet of snow outside the hotel. I mean, literally the door of the hotel could not be opened. So we were marooned inside, and the organizing team had met at the coffee shop to sort of fuel up and get to the hall. And we realized that the man who was to give the opening keynote on the first day, a very famous literary non-fiction writer by the name of Tom Wolfe, who actually wrote the book on non-fiction journalism, he was nowhere to be found. We called him up, and he said, I'm stuck in a snowdrift halfway between New York and Boston. Figured there's no way he was going to make it, so now we are a keynote speaker short, literally by then an hour and a half before the event is supposed to begin. And we're wondering what the hell to do when somebody pushed that door open, a gust of snow came in, and followed by 3 people, all bedraggled, clothes dripping with water. And Jay, who was facing the door, he said, guess who just walked in? It's David Halberstam. Halberstam was there as an attendee. He was not doing any sessions. Jay had this brainwave. He said, let me go see if he'll do it. So he went up to Halberstam and said, whatever. He came back smiling from ear to ear. He said, Halberstam said, yeah, I'll do it. So we had a keynote speaker. So we could drink our coffee in peace. Half an hour to go for the event. We went to the stage, checked the mics and all the rest of it. And as I was leaving along with Jay and the others, I was looking this side and I realized that Halberstam was sitting there with this big pot of coffee and his friends, and they were chatting quite happily. This is a man who has to talk to an audience of veteran, top-line journalists. You're talking of probably the 50, 60 biggest names in journalism in the United States. He was showing no signs of wanting to prepare. So I asked Jay, does he know it's today? He might think it's tomorrow. And Jay said, no, I've made it very clear that it's at 9 o'clock. Okay. So we go to the stage, and at some point Jay turns to me and says, can you go fetch David? It's 10 minutes to the event. What followed next, even when recounting it, I have goosebumps, because what happened was this guy with his wet clothes, with his bedraggled, hair all over the place, came backstage. He was introduced by Jay. He walked onto the stage. He started with the words, "Today I want to talk to you about the importance of telling stories." And then he started speaking, and it was seamless. You know how we normally speak extempore? There is a while we're trying to collect our thoughts. There is a pause. There is a fragmented sentence. I'm not making this up. This is not hyperbole. I swear to you that if somebody had actually recorded that speech and transcribed it and published it without changing a word, it would have been a masterful essay on the need for all of us to tell and to listen to stories. And for me, the big learning was, look, don't try to write in a different, you have a voice. And when you use that voice easily and fluidly, your writing, your spoken word, it's all the same. It's just communication. It's just, me speaking to you and you speaking to me. This is magical. I know what you mean by you are a stalker, because I think you were passing by when you heard me mention this, and but that's the story. Yeah. Yes, ma'am?
Hello.
Ma'am, before you ask the question, I'm not sir, I'm Prem.
Okay.
And two, if you want an answer from a specific person, me or Neha, please say that.
I want to ask from both of you.
Okay.
It's an honor to ask. And my first question is on climate change. I have seen dogs drinking soap water, detergent water. I've seen cows drinking water which is used to color the dupatta of women. And it is very unhygienic. My mother, I asked her, we have to give water to birds, it's summer. She said, take any water. This is soap water. They can drink, they don't have diarrhea. She's right. But I read somewhere that fluorine, if it enters through blood-brain barrier or some chemical, it can even cause schizophrenia. So my first question is on climate change, that animals don't have mind and we humans are not using our mind. So what are we doing? We are threatening their lives. And my second question is, I'm a writer and I like to write novel things. But my publicity is based on number of views I get, number of readers I get. Should I write what people want to read, or should I write what I want them to read? So even if I have 5 views and 5 pertinent people have read, why my article is less than anybody who gets lakhs of views? Thank you.
Okay, I'll quickly answer it to the best of my ability, and then I'll pass it on to the expert. I'll take your second question first. Toni Morrison. A bird doesn't sing because it has an audience. A bird sings because it has a song. You write because you have something to say. And the size of the audience does not validate what you have written. In the earlier session, I brought up the example of BuzzFeed, which was running circles around mainstream media, millions and millions of views more than mainstream media and all of that, because they did listicles, they did sensationalist stuff. Where's BuzzFeed today? All those millions, there's no validation. So, to your second question, when you have something that you want to say, you think you're adding to the general conversation, to the general debate, discussion, what have you, please write. And if one person reads it, that is one person who might start thinking a little bit, and that is better than zero. It's a simple thing. You don't measure your thoughts. For example, I'm sitting here doing an AMA. There are about 20 people in the room. I could as well say, why am I bothering with 1 hour's worth of my time for 20 people? That's not how it works. To the other question, I think you're confusing pollution with climate change to a large extent. The dyes in the water that we drink, or the water that your mom wanted to be given to the birds, etc., are not a factor or a function of climate change. They're a factor of how we are ruining the earth that we live on. We are, to put it very crudely, shitting in our own nest. Unfortunate but true. You brought up something about animals not having a mind and humans having a mind but not using it. Animals not having a mind is one of the biggest myths there is, and that's where I want Neha to come in. That's not true. Neha will talk about this.
Thank you. What is a mind really? Is it intelligence? Is it the ability to do mathematics? Is it the ability to read a book? Is it the ability to survive? Animals have sentience and consciousness and ways in which they live and survive in this world. They may not be able to do a mathematical sum, but that is not enough of an indicator of having a mind. So the conventional answer is, of course, animals have a mind. Not only do they have a mind, they are soulful in the sense that they respond to distress, to the pain of another animal. They are able to identify themselves in reflections. So all the markers that we have for intelligence and sentience, many of them exist in animals, and many of them exist in animals way more than it is in us. So a lot of animals are able to predict bad things that will happen, such as a flood or an earthquake, and we are still trying to understand how a dog can sniff out cancer in human beings, for example. So yes, they can't do mathematical sums, but that is a very limited view of intelligence, and animals are intelligent and sentient, and they certainly have a mind. And I think the fact is that we are on top of the food chain. So when you say we are not using our mind, I would say it's correct to a great extent. We are on top of the food chain. We are sort of at the top of the political economy. Therefore, it is incumbent upon us to do things that allow other things to survive, and not just to survive, but to flourish, to thrive, right? And if we are able to identify that there are so many animals or plants or ecosystems on Earth, and they deserve to live, and it's upon us what we do. Coming to the other question about pollution and fluoride, etc. You know, the issue is, as he said, we are very destructive. So we're just destroying what we have. And if we have this great mind that we love to talk about, then it's important to also use it for the next generation. It's called intergenerational equity. So I can't take up everything. Like somebody else's kids, the next generation also needs to have those resources and to be able to see a bird in the sky and a whale in the waters. And your other question about readership, you know, it's definitely a challenge that authors face. We all want to be read. I think authors want to say something, but they also want that something to be seen and read by others. I think the most important thing is to work on your craft, and your readership will follow, even if it's slow. And I completely agree with Prem when he says that it doesn't really matter. Numbers don't really matter, and they should never really matter. What has to matter is the craft that you have and the amount of work you're willing to put in to make your craft better. I think the goal has to be better today than you were yesterday. And I think your figures and your numbers will follow. And there's so many artists who never get their due in their lifetime. I hope that's not the case with you or with any of us. But I'm just saying the art is more important. I believe that, yeah.
Look up the history of a lot of the Renaissance painters, by the way.
Yeah.
Vincent van Gogh is a classic example. He's not a Renaissance painter, sorry, but he's a classic example. He died broke. He died without food on his table. What does a Vincent van Gogh sketch go for today? Dozens of millions. Usually art and writing is, I know that people differentiate between art as in dance, drama, music, painting, all of that is art, writing is a craft. Writing is a mix of both. There is an art to it and there's a craft to it, and when the two come together, you've got the perfect sort of thing. But yeah, like she said, just do your thing and don't get disheartened, don't give up.
Hi. So in the latest series of event, we have seen a lot of resignation by the NDTV journalists following the acquisition of Adani Group and all that. So my question is that will we ever be able to strike a sweet balance between wherein the media houses are people's voices, but they're also appropriately funded?
Can we strike a balance? We will at some point. this thing is cyclical. So I remember sitting in on a very serious discussion, top media professionals, who were arguing that print was dead and what do we do next? Their argument was increasingly the advertising dollars are flowing to television and to live events like cricket or whatever, and print advertising is declining. When that declines, print is actually far more expensive. I can think of only two things that we produce that we sell for less than cost. One is your inland letter, which no longer is relevant, and the other is the newspaper. Every newspaper costs you about $50, including your paper, your plates, your ink, distribution, all of that, and you get it for what, $3.50, $5. And so there was this discussion happening. And lots of heartburn, lots of panic, lots of what do we do now, throwing up their hands in the air and stuff like that. The discussion was in 1995. This was when cable was really swamping, or at least ramping up. Here we are in 2023, print hasn't died. We periodically write these epitaphs for the media, whether it is a section of the media or the media in entirety. What happens is that the media goes through crises. We have historically gone through crises. In fact, the other session when we were talking about the origin of long-form narrative, I'd made the point that it is in the 50s and the early 60s when television started becoming the principal provider of news for those in the United States, that the print medium decided that their relevance in terms of providing news was no longer valid. And so they had to figure out an alternative. And that alternative ultimately ended up being what we now call narrative nonfiction. So we will go through a crisis. We have been through crises before. We will miss what is right in front of our eyes, which is that the old advertising and revenue models are dead and have been dead for quite some time. And then at some point we'll figure the next one out. It's not that there isn't an alternative, there is. The question, for example, back when I was doing India Abroad, I remember having this conversation with my CEO who shot it down, but whatever. The problem was in the United States, you have about, 2.53 million Indian Americans who are our prime constituency for India Abroad. The catch is that they don't all live in the same place. So you'll have a location somewhere outside of Washington, D.C. with 10 families who will subscribe to the paper. We'll have a location somewhere in Texas with 5 families, they'll subscribe to the paper. Sending this paper to all these places by mail, by post, was rapidly escalating our cost to a point where it was no longer tenable. What is a simple solution to that? Put the paper online. Create a PDF version. You can go to a Kinko's and get it printed out if you want the physical paper in your hand. So somewhere along the way we have to, look, they say this in business. You can't do the same thing today that you did yesterday and expect a different result. We are now going through this phase where we are doing the exact same thing day after day after day and beating our breasts and saying, "Arey, kya ho raha hai?" We will come out of it. Journalism will not die, media will not die. The takeover of an NDTV is not going to finish television journalism. Media has been taken over before, what happened? But it's going to be painful while it lasts. And my best guess, it will last for at least another 2 years.
Also to add here that there's also a lot of new media that is there. And a lot of people are on Substack in which they ask you to sign up for their newsletter and you get their newsletter in your inbox. And I think that's wonderful because we are slowly moving away from the big channel, big newspaper paradigm in India. So there's so many experts who are commentators either using the internet like a podcast or using YouTube or using Substack as a newsletter medium. And some of them are extremely good. And I think as readers, we should put our dollars and rupees behind at least some of the creators who are there and who are doing a very specialized but very important job. And I think small media also is a very, very important part of the larger media landscape.
Let me try a thought experiment with you. Neha actually has given up a trip to Pench to be here to do this session because this wasn't planned originally. So the question for you is this. Neha spends all her time on concerns of environmentalism, of wildlife conservation, etc., etc. Suppose she were to do a weekly newsletter, which is literally reporting from the field about things that you and I will not necessarily be able to see, to understand, to appreciate. Would you be willing to subscribe to that newsletter for a cost of about, say, $50 a month?
Definitely. Personally, I would.
You would, right?
Yeah.
How many people would in this room? There you go. Her dinner is done for. It's taken care of. This is one of the solutions. Increasingly, people who have specialities, who don't find space in mainstream. Where in mainstream media do you hear people talking about conservation? Where do you hear them talking about man-animal conflict or any of the other issues? You're driving massive highways through your, reserved forests. Where do you hear people talking about what that is doing to the daily life cycle of the animal? So you need experts, you need a Neha to tell you about that. And you're interested, and I'm presuming that as a human being you're interested in the world around you, it's a small sum to pay. So yeah, that'll be one of the emerging models. She's bang on. And on that newsletter, she can do it in text, she can do it in audio, she can do it in video, she can do it in images. In other words, she can do what print and television does. There you go.
Thank you so much.
Start that newsletter.
Thanks.
No, seriously.
Yeah, think about it.
I think he has a last question for Neha. No? She has to leave.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. मेरा भी सवाल था. So you go ahead.
I have a question for both of you. In the month of November 2022, OpenAI launched something called ChatGPT, and it was the fastest to 1 million subscribers in the shortest amount of time. And I have tried it personally, and it's spooky, and at the same time, it's a fact that you can't avoid in the future. The technology is going to develop further, and it can write songs, it can write books, and recently I've read the news that ChatGPT actually can be hired for an entry-level coding job in Google. What is your opinion on this subject?
You want to take it and go, or should I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw Amitabh Ghosh's tweet on this. That was the first time in which he used ChatGPT to write a passage in Amitabh Ghosh's style. So he's like, I'm going to be out of a job because this is what they've written. But you know, it takes an Amitabh Ghosh to create an Amitabh Ghosh style, right? Like, thank you. It takes an A.R. Rahman to create an A.R. Rahman style. And then you're like, all Rahman songs sound the same, but then he created a style. And so I think there can never be a substitute for human enterprise. And some of the more boring tasks can be outsourced. But for truly creative things or innovative things, I don't think, how can something that doesn't live within the social context, that's not a human being in the sense of, it doesn't feel pain and anxiety, and I think pain and anxiety are great drivers for writing, right? I went to the forest, I had like 1 million tick bites, and that's going to reflect in my writing. So I don't think we can ever be substituted. I don't even feel the kind of anxiety or fear that a lot of authors have also spoken about, but I think it can be used for the less, for the more boring things, for the more technical things. I would love to use it to just summarize a Niti Aayog document, for example, because I work in environmental policy and I have to read like 500 pages every day of really, in fact, Prem and I were talking about Supreme Court judgments, which sometimes tend to be really long, verbose, and even United Nations documents that one has to interact with are very long and tough and jargonistic. I would love to use AI to just summarize. I don't know if I can trust it, but at least for the simpler things, But as a writer or an author, I don't feel that we can ever be substituted. I'm really sorry I have to leave. So can I just ask you to finish? Thank you.
So, to that same, I'll come to your questions. She's kind of left me orphaned over here, but...
You have a stalker now. You are in.
Okay, brilliant.
I didn't sign up for it.
So, the Obama election, the first one, if you follow if you follow US politics, one of the things that you will find is that the presidential election takes up a lot of the oxygen, the media oxygen. That's all the headlines are about, that's all the stories are about, and some of them are incredibly trivial. Obama went and had a subway. I mean, who cares? How does that make him, But the local elections are where your chief of police is elected, where your local circuit court judge is elected, where the head of the school board is elected. And these people have a massive influence within their communities. A bigoted cop leads to the kind of killings that we see. A bigoted school teacher censors books and says these are not to be read, etc. So nobody covers them because 50 states, in every single state during the elections, there are about 150 elections going on. Washington Post said that year, before the election cycle began, that they were going to cover local races and local issues. They covered a total of, if I'm not mistaken, they did a total of about 850, somewhere between 850 and 925. I'm not sure of the exact number, but it's in that range. So when Washington Post made the announcement, people said, oh, this is not viable. It's just Jeff Bezos has a lot of money, he's throwing it around. And they did these stories. The stories got over 20 million page views. People were interested. The aftermath is that after the election, the Washington Post announced that all those local stories had been done by an artificial intelligence engine, call it a bot or whatever. It was called the hieroglyph. That was the first. Today, if you read Bloomberg News, at least 40% of their content is created by artificial intelligence. ChatGPT did not break fresh ground, it just made it. Until now, you needed a lot of resources to create one of these things. By creating it and putting it in the public domain, they've democratized it to some extent. Also, you will notice that every time new technology comes in, there is a lot of breastbeating what will happen to human beings. Computer aa gaya tha, tab bhi yahi tha. Oh, computers will take over the world, then the human being will have nothing to do. But somebody has to punch those buttons. Somebody has to ask ChatGPT a question. Somebody has to look at the answer and vet it for quality, even if we don't do any writing of our own. Funnily enough, there is, these apps that you use to collect things from the internet and store it. Like I read a good article or a piece of information comes my way, whatever. There's an app called Notion, which I use a lot. Now, Notion, day before yesterday, just sent me an invite for the beta version of an artificial intelligence engine that they're building on top. So what does Notion do? It collects everything that we want to collect. But my problem is, I've been doing this for like at least 20 years. I brought everything into Notion. Earlier it was Evernote, etc. Now, when I want to write about a particular subject, I've got tons and tons of stuff that I've accumulated. I do a search, a keyword search, and pages after pages of results come up. Now I have to go through this entire thing to figure out what is relevant or what is not. What Notion does is it sits on top of my stack, I query it, and I say, okay, I want to write about man-animal conflict. Caveat, it has to be in the Hassan Kurg region and nowhere else. It will go through my entire collection and it will pull out only what is relevant. It will summarize it for me. It will give me the links to the original articles and it will put it on a page. The thing with tools is you either become its slave or its master. The choice is yours. But yeah, if we master the tool, what does hieroglyph do for Washington Post? What it does is the donkey work of doing these. अरे प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में जाके he said this लिखने के लिए you're sending a journalist who is actually being paid a salary. Why do you need it? You can automate that process. The feed is coming anyway. Just take the feed, transcribe it and put it out. Khatam. So what does that do? It frees up this journalist to go do more important work. So it depends on how you think of the tool. If you think of it as some scary little monster that's going to take away your job, you're dead. But if you step back and say, wait a minute, what's my opportunity here? There's plenty.
Oh, we have a question. He's been waiting. Yeah, he's been waiting.
Yeah. So, Prem, I want to sort of come back to conservation and climate change. So, two questions. One question, how is India doing as compared to the world on doing something towards addressing the climate change impact? And how much of it should be looked at the lens of it's still developing, so it should get a bandwidth of we need to develop while ensuring we have a balance with the nature. And second is the most sensationalist question, feel free to ignore it. What's like your 50 years later, 100 years later, when do you see it going to a point of no return?
Here's the funny thing about climate change that we need to appreciate, right? In fact, here's the funny thing about understanding anything that we need to appreciate, which is go to the root cause. What are we talking about when we're talking of climate change? Global warming, etc., etc. Global warming leads to glacier melt, it leads to the polar ice cap melting, which leads to rising seas. Meanwhile, the heat leads to more intense monsoons, which lead to floods, which etc., etc., etc. What is causing all this? We are saying it is the CO2 that we're releasing into the atmosphere. The problem with reducing it to a binary like how are we doing compared to the rest of the world is that carbon dioxide that is emitted by India does not hover over India. So wherever there is a problem, it is a human problem, it's a mankind problem, it's an earth problem. How are we doing? There are multiple ways of looking at it. One of the ways of looking at it, and this can be demonstrated with statistics if necessary, is that climate change didn't happen last decade. It didn't happen since we are feeling the effects increasingly. But it didn't happen in the last couple of decades or whatever. It happened much before that. How far back do you go to map this, unbridled release of carbon dioxide, this unbridled attack on the universe? You could go back to the Industrial Revolution, right? So what happened was some of the countries already developed, already industrialized, and now they're saying, okay, let's put a stop to all this. Meanwhile, other countries are industrializing. They're trying to develop. And they're saying, look, you've already reached there. I'm trying to get there. And you're telling me that you and I should be level when it comes to carbon emissions. That doesn't work. It's a fair argument. But the counter argument to that is, we can split hairs all we like, but ultimately if the planet collapses, all of us are in for it. Developed nations, non-developed nations, there's no, some of the biggest weather events that have happened in recent years have hit the United States of America. Another big one was China. All of whom are doing a lot to reduce carbon emissions, etc. So I would imagine, or I would argue that in issues like this, you cannot reduce this to a political debate or a country versus country debate. I think you need to see this as holistically as possible. I hate that COP thing that they do simply because they go there and they add to climate change with the gas that they, spout, and nothing comes of it. What is the other question again?
Point of no return.
Point of no return, well, scientists are saying that it was yesterday. Because ultimately, what they're basically trying to say is that we've already done so much damage that even there is no way on earth, for example, that we can say as of, carbon dioxide emission. And carbon dioxide emission is one part of the problem. I'm just using that to highlight the thing. We cannot say that, carbon dioxide emission is a problem, therefore tomorrow onwards we will stop emitting carbon dioxide. Kaise hota hai? Right? So this is an ongoing thing. You might reduce the thing, but you've already made it reach critical levels, which you are seeing in the weather patterns changing, therefore the knock-on effects on the landscape, on the environment, on people's lives, all of that. So I think that it's a mistake to say, okay, if in the next 10 years we can create carbon sinks and somehow pull this, because in the next 10 years you will have so many catastrophes that, I mean, बाद में देखा जाएगा. But I'm not at all sure that we have the time. I personally am not sure. I'm no climate scientist. I follow climate change because environment is part of what I do. My best guess answer is this.
So, no, I think we had a question.
Yeah. Last question, and we are having the short of time. Rather than asking a question, I want to just share my experience of teaching. When the new NEP policy is in, and now I do not know what will be the impact of new NEP policy for the students. For 11th and 12th being a very मोड रहता है वहाँ अपने करियर का. I asked all the parents, almost all the parents, IAS, IPS, MPSC, managers and everyone, कि what is the textbook, जो 11-12 का textbook लिखा है, उसका नाम क्या है? Sir, 99% of the parents was unable to answer because the book, state board book, clearly says that 11th and 12th mathematics in bracket art/science. So mathematics is an art. ये हमारे IAS, IPS बड़े बड़े thinker को ये transform नहीं कर पा रहे हैं. And
So,
I want
one second,
that
sir.
you
Is there a
should-
question?
You should include these thoughts in your writing. That's all.
There's no question. So let's.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
it was more a recommendation, so yeah, I'll think about it. I'm not an expert in that field, but I do know people who are, and I'll pass this on to them, which is the best I can do. Thank you very much.
So because it's an Ask Me Anything, so I want to ask you, are you a feminist?
What is a feminist?
Are you someone who believes that women and men should have equal rights?
I don't understand at what point in our thinking or in what point in our life cycle we came to a point where we even need to debate this.
Exactly, that is why we need feminism.
So I don't understand. I'm not a feminist. I'm a humanist, if you will. I see people as people. Whether you are a female or a male or transgender or whatever, it does not matter to me. I rate you on what you do, who you are, how you behave, things like that. If you're talking of feminism in practical terms, in terms of, let's say, job opportunities, etc., I think that, again, like we, in the previous session, briefly, the point of Dalit voices came up. I think we have moved a little bit forward from where we used to be. We haven't moved anywhere close to how far we still have to go. So my best guess is all we can do is just keep on moving forward, but I don't think the situation is as bad as it was. In fact, it's not as bad as it was 10 years ago. It's certainly not as bad as it was when I was growing up and watching my grandmother and my elder aunts and all of that. So yeah, I mean, we can fight these battles without getting into binaries. And see, one of the things that happens when you try to put me in a box, am I a feminist, am I not a feminist, whatever, is I have to buy the whole box. So, no, I mean, honestly, there are things about feminism as a movement, with due respect, the shrillness of some self-professed soi-disant feminists, which I disagree with. There are lots of women who are doing quiet work to improve the lot of women as a whole, and whatever I can do to help, I will continue to do. I don't need to belong to a movement. I already belong to the one movement that matters, which is the human movement. I'm fine with that.
That's okay, I got my answer.
I think we're short on time, so I think we'll have to wrap up. Unless you have one more question, then I'll allow it.
Yeah, I have my last question.
But it has to be very short, sweet answer, and let's...
This is crony capitalism in another form. Both of them are part of the organizing committee, so they're like, okay, tumhara hai to.
If you don't want to answer, I won't ask. Who's your favorite mythological character?
My favorite mythological character, I can't name any one favorite. I can name about half a dozen. Hector would be one of them from the Iliad. Abhimanyu would be one of them from the Mahabharata. Vali would be one of them from Ramayana. Okay, I said half a dozen, I'll stay with quarter dozen. But don't judge me by my choices. This is...
No judgment here.
Yeah, actually, because she asked this question and because mythology came up, I'll just throw out something, a complete non sequitur for those who like to read. Hopefully you all know the story of Troy, of the Iliad, the Odyssey, which are twin epics connected by a common character. And then when the Romans became big, when Augustus became emperor, he decided that Rome needed its own epic, so he got Virgil to write the Aeneid. There's a guy who's a fantasy writer called David Gemmell, who's written a trilogy which spans all three books and completely reimagines them. The name is Gemmell, the surname is Gemmell, Gemmell. If you love reading, I would suggest that you read it because it is absolutely brilliant imagination. It also tells you that epics don't rest in a period of time. They're endlessly malleable. You can keep coming back to that over and over and retelling them over and over in many ways. Thank you all very much. I thought this would be a very, 5 people who'd land up. It turns out that...
Yeah, so many people came up and this conversation was amazing. So thank you so much to everybody for being here, and thank you so much for smiling. I love that you guys are enjoying this session and the rest as well. Let's have a huge round of applause, everybody.